There's news about you in the Financial Times this morning. About an hour ago, they broke the story that you are going to Taiwan. True?
Well, we had intended to go a few months ago. The trip got canceled due to a budget-related schedule change here in Congress, so no one could travel. And then the speaker fiasco delayed another trip that we had. So it was always our intention to reschedule the trip. We really want to take the committee out there. I think it would be great to meet with Vice President, now President-elect Lai Ching-te. I met with him when I went to Taiwan last time. And what was interesting, Hugh, he at the time used a basketball analogy with me, since we're talking about basketball today. He said that if this is a one-on-one competition, if it's China versus the United States, or certainly China versus Taiwan, China could win. But if it's a team playing together against China, there's no way that we can lose, particularly as you look at the investments some of our key allies in the region are making, particularly Japan and particularly Australia with this AUKUS agreement. So we have an opportunity, if we do things right, if we have the courage to stand up to communist aggression, to ensure that deterrence holds in the Indo-Pacific, even as we see it collapsing in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. So I think Vice President Lai and what will be his vice president, who was our former ambassador to the United States from Taiwan, will be a very strong team to work with. And so I look forward to a discussion. I learned a lot from my last trip to Taiwan, and I encourage every member of Congress to go visit.
When will you personally be going?
We don't have the final dates, but hopefully this quarter or early next.
Now, Congressman,
it all depends on the schedule, Hugh.
The Senate Democrats put on the table yesterday, and President Biden endorsed, a deal that has funding for Taiwan, for Israel, for Ukraine, and some minor changes in law on the border. I want this rejected unless and until 900 miles of border wall are authorized and the money appropriated for construction this summer. And by authorized, I mean notwithstanding any other law, notwithstanding any treaty with an Indian tribe or foreign nation, notwithstanding NEPA, CEQA, notwithstanding, CEQA doesn't apply, NEPA, ESA, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, nothing. Just build it. What is Mike Gallagher's position?
Well, first, since I'm a Catholic, before I criticize, let me do some self-flagellation here. We in the House should have just passed a standalone Israel bill that had a better offset, that didn't score in the wrong direction, or either wasn't offset. It would have been $10 billion. It would have been a good investment, and it would have taken Israel out of these negotiations. So we miscalculated on that, and that would have made for a cleaner set of negotiations tying Ukraine and border security. I agree with your fundamental point that while the Senate Republicans have made some progress on important policy changes, in order to secure the border, which is what we must do and what indeed the American people are crying out for us to do, I believe in bipartisan fashion crying out for us to do, we need a wall, as you outlined. We need key policy changes, particularly asylum policy changes. And then what is overlooked, we need to change how our immigration courts operate, particularly giving immigration court judges contempt authority so they can enforce some order in their courts so people actually show up and we don't have people that get a court date 3 years down the road and then just fade away into American society illegally, never to be seen again. Those sort of three lines of effort are what you need. It's now time for Speaker Johnson to drive a very hard bargain with the White House. And quite frankly, Hugh, I think we're actually doing President Biden a favor, right? By forcing him to make these concessions on an issue that your average American feels is crazy, that the border is so unsecure and porous and is becoming a national security risk. We're doing the president a favor, and he just can't continue to be beholden to his progressive base. So I hope the speaker stays strong. Thus far, he is staying strong, and we should drive a very hard bargain.
Do you believe that the Republican conference is united in demanding a border wall of 900 miles and that everything else is DOA? Jim Talent, who came on just before you, said, this is a must-have deal for the Democrats. The Republicans can demand and get whatever they want. They ought to demand. There are some changes in law that need to be made, and they're small and they're not understood by the politics. But we understand 900 miles of Trump wall, and I think the reason they don't want to build it is because it's Trump wall, which isn't a good reason to be against a good national security thing.
Yeah, I think we're broadly united. I mean, certainly united on the goal of getting 100% operational control of the southern border. Now, people, when you get into the weeds, can disagree about, okay, in this section of the border, do you need a tower leveraging AI systems and personnel versus a concrete wall, right? You can get, but broadly, yes, I think the conference is united. And I think the conference wants to get to an outcome that secures the southern border and is willing to consider in return for that targeted clinical support to Ukraine that, by the way, replenishes our own munitions industrial base. And that's the other thing we should have done. We should have passed my bill, the Fires Act, which would have simply allowed the Pentagon to use the money that it doesn't spend at the end of the year towards the production of critical munitions. This would have rebuilt our stockpiles in a way that's not only relevant for Israel, but also Ukraine and critically Taiwan. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to restore our arsenal of deterrence and move to maximum production rates of long-range precision fires. We can't screw that up. And it's not a large amount of money relative to what the Pentagon spends on more expensive and exquisite platforms.
There's $60 billion proposed for Ukraine in here. I'm for that. I talked to Dr. Oren earlier. He said they need JDAMs and they need 155 rounds. I'm for that. I don't know what we're sending to Taiwan. I'm for that. I know we need a border wall. It can't cost that much money, all total. It's not even $300 billion compared to the trillions we spent. How hard of a lift is it? What is wrong with the Democrats?
I think, listen, there's this debate about what are their true intentions with respect to the southern border. I think a lot of this is just like bleeding heart liberalism. It's this idea that, anyone who comes across the southern border is, part of like the victim group, and therefore we have an obligation in the United States to take care of them. But I think they're really ignoring the concerns that we're seeing, not just in border states, but in states like mine, right? Our closest border is the Canadian border. And yet we are dealing with homicides related to drug cartels. We're dealing with fentanyl epidemic that's claiming thousands of lives every year. I mean, this is happening even in Northeast Wisconsin. And oh, by the way, the Democrats now, when it comes to the fentanyl issue, are all thinking that this deal that President Biden got with Xi Jinping coming out of the APEC summit, whereby China makes some illusory promises to crack down on fentanyl precursor production, is going to yield fruit. Blinken was in Davos this week talking about how good of a deal this was. We've seen this movie before, Hugh. The Chinese Communist Party makes all sorts of promises and then never delivers. We pay up front, but their check is always in the mail. And there's just a certain amount of naivety that explains the Biden administration's approach to all of these things.
Quick question. Can the Republicans win Wisconsin in 2024?
We can. We really need to fix our party organization, starting at the county level. The Democrats are playing for keeps, so we really need to get our act together.